The 2026 men's VNL is set to be a doozy, and I've got you set up with everything you need to know before the 2-month-long competition starts this week. Over the course of the next 2 months, and even a little bit over that, the men's finals goes all the way into August. 18 of the best men's volleyball national teams will be competing all around the world, going head-to-head to find out who the best team in the VNL for 2026 is. Now, if you're new to volleyball, the VNL is a yearly competition that is played over the course of 3 different weeks in 3 different locations weekly. There is a field of 18 of the best men's and women's teams. They alternate week by week. And then each location hosts 6 teams, and every team plays 4 matches over the course of the week. At the end of the Intercontinental round, the top 7 men's teams will head to China and join the host for the finals, while the last place team, team number 18 in the standings, will be relegated and will be out of the competition for 2027. This week by week, it breaks down like this. June 10th to 14th, week 1 will be happening in Ottawa, Canada, Brasilia, Brazil, and Linyi, China. Week number 2, June 24th to the 28th, will happen in Orléans, France, Gliwice, Poland, and Ljubljana, Slovenia. That's a rare one because it's an all-Europe leg. And then finally in week 3, July 15th to the 19th, will happen in Belgrade, Serbia, Chicago, USA, and Kansai, Japan, before everything wraps up July 29th to August 2nd in Ningbo, China. The 18 teams are broken up into 3 separate groups, and they're basically broken up based off of their world ranking. At the end of the 3 weeks, each teams will have played 4 teams from each group. Now, in Group 1, you have essentially all the best teams in the world. You've got Poland, Italy, Brazil, France, Japan, and the US. In Group 2, you have Slovenia, Germany, Argentina, Cuba, Canada, and Serbia. And then finally in Group 3, you have Iran, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Turkiye, Belgium, and China. Each national federation nominates 30 athletes to their entire roster or their wide roster for the VNL. And then before every week, a team will nominate 18 players to their roster, and it's going to contain 4 main players and 4 alternates. And those alternates can switch back and forth with the main roster day in and day out. So teams can choose to dress any of those players from the 18. Generally, no, they don't always bring the 18, but they can bring up to 18, and they can choose any one of those players to dress. So rosters might be slightly different from one day to the next. Now, 2026 is really important for the VNL for a few reasons. First and foremost, Olympic qualifying starts this year, and while it won't happen directly at the VNL, it is a really good training ground for those teams to get ready for the Continental Championships, where the Continental qualifiers will be happening at the end of the summer. And since 5 teams are going to win their bid to go to the Olympics in LA in 2028, teams are getting ready in various fashions. Some of the top teams are resting their best players, whereas some of the other teams are bringing their entire lineup and tinkering with some things so they can be as ready as possible to compete for the spot at Olympics at the end of the summer. But also, when it comes to Olympic qualification, the last stage of Olympic qualification is done through the world ranking points. And every match you play, there is points up on the line. If you win, you're going to be gaining points, and if you lose, you're going to be losing points. So matches played now in 2026 are still super important, despite us being 3 VNLs away from qualification at the end of the competition in 2028. Now, in 2025, this competition was so tight. Only 1 win and 3 points on the schedule. You get 3 points for a 3-0 or a 3-1 win, or 2 points for a 3-2 win, and 1 point for a 2-3 loss. So only 1 win and 3 points separated 7th from 14th. Cuba finished 7th and qualified for the finals with a record of 6-6 and 20 points, whereas Germany finished 14th with a record of 5-7 and 17 points. That is just how tight this tournament actually is. Now, depending on where you are in the world, some of the matches are streamed on TV, and otherwise you can watch all of the matches over on VBTV. But if you really want to follow along, make sure to follow Volleyball Source, hit the subscribe button, turn on the little bell notification for all the content that will be coming out over the course of the next 2 months. And while you're at it, just give this video a like. And then, of course, come join us over on the Volleyball Source Discord, the best online volleyball community in the world, hands down. Now, shout out to Peru Volley over on Instagram. That's where I got the graphics for all of the rosters. So make sure you go follow them. And before I got this started, I know some of these teams really well and others not so much. So if I make a mistake or if there's someone I left out, feel free to go down into the comments, let me know I'm an idiot, and tell me where I went wrong so the entire community can learn together. Now I'm going to be going down the list of these teams in alphabetical order. So that means we're going to be starting with Argentina. Now, Argentina is going to be very similar to what we saw last year. This is a very talented roster, but they're still trying to figure out how to replace some of the holes from some of the retirements we've seen over the past number of seasons. Now, this is a team that is still feeling the loss of Facundo Conte and Bruno Lima, and it's also missing their libero, Santiago Denani. They do have a brand new coach this year as Marcelo Mendez has moved on, and they brought in Horacio Delio as their head coach. However, this is a guy who's been around, who's been on the roster before, who was an assistant coach last year, so he knows what's going on. And from what I hear, it's pretty much just going to be business as usual. One thing that is exciting for Argentina fans, and I mean just volleyball fans as a whole, is Luciano De Checo is on this roster. However, I don't really expect him to play all that much. I mean, the VNL is a grueling schedule. And when you have the likes of Matias Sanchez and Matias Giraudo behind him, I think those two guys are mainly going to lead the way for Argentina over the course of the VNL. Argentina, as usual, is pretty strong on the outside. You've got Luciano Polonsky, who was great in Turkiye this year. Luciano Vicentin, who was awesome for Tokyo and the SV League. He did suffer an injury this year, but did come back and play throughout the playoffs, so that is good news for Argentina. But then you also got guys like Jan Martinez Franqui, Ignacio Luengas, and then also Manuel Armoa. At only 23 years old, this is one of the guys we've really expected to kind of blow up and be the next big thing from Argentina, and it really hasn't been the case. He's been on this team for a few years, hasn't really been able to break into that starting lineup. And while he played half of his season in Brazil and did pretty well, he then signed for a team in Dubai. And that is just never a good sign when players are leaving good teams to be able to go sign with teams in the Middle East. They're super strong down the middle with Augustin Lozère, one of the best middle blockers in the world. But then you also got guys like Nicolas Zerba, Joaquin Gallego, Martin Ramos. Just super solid down the middle. And then on the opposite, you've got Pablo Kokartsev, who was the backup for Lube this year, and also the young Herman Gomez. And we're going to see if he can really build himself from last year. He was pretty decent, but the hole that Bruno Lima has left on the right side is a big one for Argentina. The Argentine squad is super solid, as always, so I expect them to be there and compete, but they're still just missing a little something to jump up into being one of the best teams in the world again. Next up, we have Belgium, and Belgium is new, and Belgium are the newcomers to the VNL this year, having been promoted through the world ranking points last year. And while they are the newcomers, I think everyone is excited to see what this team can do this season in the VNL. They're ranked 15th, but last year they did make some big waves at the World Championships by beating Italy in group play, winning their pool, and eventually finishing 7th, falling to Italy in the quarterfinals. And now this is a very young team with a lot of really good offensive talent. But before we talk about that young talent, we do have to talk about one of their best players in Sam Deroux. Deroux has been a star on the professional level for a number of years, playing in a number of different countries, but we did see him get diagnosed with cancer back in December. He did undergo chemotherapy and did return to the Lokomotiv lineup for the 2026 Russian League playoffs, but he did play sparingly and only really came in off the bench. He hasn't really played in any of the friendlies so far, but that doesn't mean he won't be featured in the VNL. But regardless, without Deroux, this is an absolutely stacked roster. You've got guys like Ferry Regers, who's been one of the top scorers in Italy for a number of years now. Basil Dermot, who was fantastic and really blew up this year for Knack Roselaire in the Champions League. You've also got Sepe Rotti, who was another big player for Knack Roselaire, was expected to have a big year for Milano before he got injured. And now that he's healthy and ready to go, a lot of people are excited to see what he can do. One of the big things to note for Belgium is two of their best hitters, Regers and Dermot, both play on the right side in the opposite position. However, in friendlies, we've mostly seen Regers play on the left side because Dermot is just too good to have on the bench. Now, this isn't anything new for this Belgium team either, because this is actually how they used to line up when they were playing together in youth and junior competitions. So this is kind of business as usual for these guys who have really grown up together. Offensively, that means this team is going to have a lot of options. These are two guys who can take a lot of volume, take a lot of really good quality swings, and put a lot of teams in the world into tough positions. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Regers play each pin because alongside guys like Deroux and Rotti, you also have Pierre Perrin, who played for Maaseik this year, who is another player who's coming up in that system. So no shortage of talent for Belgium on the outside pins. Their undeniable leader will be Sanja Holst, one of the most underrated and just steady setters in the world. We saw that once again for him in Kanak Roselaire. But I'm also looking at potentially 21-year-old Robbie Poncelli to get some minutes. He's played for Turkiye this year. This is a guy who grew up with guys like Dermot and Rotti and Regers in the youth and junior systems. And to me, he's kind of that next guy up, the youngest guy on the roster to potentially take over the reins from the Holst in a few years' time. So if you're like me, I know you're really excited to see what this Belgium team can do this year in the VNL. Next, we have Brazil, and I mean, Brazil is synonymous with volleyball. They really don't need any introductions, but this team is looking to bounce back after disastrous World Championships where they failed to get out of the group stage for the first time since 1970. And I mean, I think everyone remembers the scenes of Bernardinho in tears right before their match with Serbia, which was ultimately this match they lost to get kicked out, which was also the day of his mother's passing. Now, Brazil is pretty much returning their entire team this year. The really only big omission you have is Alan Souza, who did miss the majority of his season for SCRA in the Plusliga with an injury. He played towards the end of the year, but still, it looks like it's going to be precautionary reasons that he is not on this roster. But his younger brother, Darlin Souza, is coming off a career year for Verona, so he is going to be the starter. You've also got Chizoba, who's been great in the Plusliga this past couple of years. But I'm also looking at 20-year-old Brian, who led the Brazilian league in scoring with 502 points this year. He also led the league in aces with 48. He's big, he's physical, he's like 6'8" or 204 centimeters, and it'll be a really good complement to the smaller, more explosive Darlin to have a big body out there like Brian, especially a young guy, because it does kind of seem like some really exceptional young talent has been missing from this Brazilian squad for the past few years. Now, their outside core is still really strong. Lucarelli is going to be the centerpiece. We didn't really see him over the course of the Intercontinental round last year in the VNL. Let's see if that changes this year. But you've still got guys like Honorato, Arthur Bento, who we saw come off the bench from Modena this year, Lucas Bergman, who we saw play for Piacenza this year as well. But then you also have Douglas Souza coming back to the national team for the first time since 2021. He retired from the national team back in 2022, citing he needed to take care of his mental health. And he actually also left his contract in Italy that year. Now, this is still a far cry from the Brazilian outside cores we've come to know over the past 20 or plus years, but this is still a very strong core. You've still got Cachopa running the offense, so there's no doubt he's going to be that number one guy. You got Mikey in the libero position as well. You've got Flavio and Judson and Nascimento to go down the middle. So Brazil is looking to have a really strong bounce back year in 2026. Next, we have Bulgaria, and I won't lie, the beginning of this list is just banger after banger, and there's no doubt to me that Bulgaria will be one of the most, if not the most scrutinized team in the VNL this year. This is a team that went 6-6 and finished 10th last year, but then we all remember the epic run they went on at the World Championships, going all the way to the finals, led by two of the most popular players in volleyball right now, Alex and Moni Nikolov. Now, I will say that that run wasn't without its criticisms. The way the tournament shook out is you had one semifinal with Italy and Poland and the other semifinal with Bulgaria and Czechia, and they just didn't really play the quality teams that were maybe on the other side of half the bracket. But regardless, they beat everyone they had to, and they still made it all the way to the finals, and you can never take that away from them. Now, obviously, a lot of the focus is going to be on the brothers. And I mean, Alex is coming off his best season in Italy yet. He led the league in scoring for Lube, averaging 5.62 points per set. Moni is coming off a fantastic rookie year in the Russian league, where he led Lokomotiv to third as just a 19-year-old. And Lokomotiv is also the team that Sam Deroux played for. So he was without one of his best players for the majority of the season, and they still managed to get third. But past the brothers, I think this is going to be a really big year to just fill out the rest of that Bulgarian squad. Sure, you've got guys like Alex Grozdanov, who in my opinion is probably one of the best middle blockers in the world right now. We've seen him have 2 fantastic seasons with Lublin in the Plus Liga. But then there is going to be a lot of decisions for Blengini to make in terms of who's going to play on the opposite, and then also who is going to slot into that P2 position. And they have a platoon of outsides who are looking to fill that spot. You got Martin Ansanasov, who at 29 years old had a really solid season for Monza. Denis Badarov, who at 23 years old was the 12th best scorer in Turkiye, averaged 4.58 points. Aspru Asparuhov, who was another guy we saw for them last year at the World Championships, had a solid year for Slepsk in Poland. Georgi Tatarov, who made some big waves last year at the World Championships, who came off the bench for them, made some really good plays at clutch moments. Now, he did kind of struggle for Crotone this year in the Italian League, but still, he's still young. He can still improve. And then there's also 19-year-old Jasmin Velichkov. And this is a guy who came off the bench for Monza, but started getting more and more playing time, especially as, some players left for all their contracts halfway through the year. Now, he showed a lot of promise for Monza, especially in serve receiver. He even had better passing numbers than his countryman in Atanasov, a guy who was 10 years his senior. So you've got at least 5 guys, and I'm not even bringing up Dennis Karyagan, who's another guy on this roster who was once a really big prospect. And I really think the priority needs to go to whoever can pass that ball, right? We've seen what's happened with Alex at Lube. He's not the best serve receiver, and teams are going to target him as he is hands down their best offensive player. And with the amount of talent they have on the outside as well, you could run a 3 outside hitter system similar to something what Lube does. And I mean, there's a lot of crossover there. Blengini used to coach at Lube. He used to coach Alex. There's just a lot of similarities of what Lube could do with the Bulgarian national team. In the opposite position, you've also got a couple of guys who are going to be looking to make a name for themselves. You got 22-year-old Venislav Antov. Now, this is a guy who was on their team last year. He did play quite a bit last year throughout the VNL and at the World Championships, and he will be definitely looked at to shoulder a bigger offensive load. He did average just over 5 points a set this year, playing for Turkiye in the French league, so hoping that he's able to mature. But then you also have Dimitar Dimitrov, who has come back to this roster. The 25-year-old played in Korea this year and averaged just under 5 points a set. So those will be 2 of the main guys who are really going to be battling for that opposite spot. Regardless, I think Bulgaria is going to have a massive target on their backs this year. Last year in the VNL, they didn't really show what they could do. And after what they did last year at the World Championships, and then what guys like Moni and Alex have done over the course of the season, a lot of teams are going to want to take some big swings at Bulgaria. And I'm really interested to see how they can handle the pressure. Next up, we have my home and native land in Canada, and the 10th ranked team in the world is looking to make some waves this year in the VNL. Last year was kind of a different look for Team Canada, and over the course of the past 10 years plus when they've been playing in the World League and in the VNL, it's always been a big pressure on their best players to show up and really pull this team and keep them alive. But last year, we saw a number of their best players take the year off. There was no Steven Marr. There was no Eric Lepke. There was no Arthur Schwartz. There was no Danny Demyanenko. And what was left was a very young squad underneath the tutelage of a brand new head coach in Dan Lewis. Now, for me, as someone who has followed Canadian volleyball for years and years, this was really a coming of age moment for this program where for the first time, we didn't need to rely on our best players to go out there and compete week in and week out. We could bring a younger team to kind of figure some things out and get some younger guys some opportunities to take some swings. And we really showed the depth of the program. Now, this year is very different as you have a number of those guys coming back. Steven Marr is back on this roster. Eric Lepke is back on this roster. Arthur Schwartz is on the roster. You also have Shawan Vernon Evans, who we saw come back last year for the World Championships as well. You've got Denny Demyanenko as well as there. Kofi is back on the roster as well. And it's looking like this is a team that is going to go out there and compete. There's just a lot of depth in a lot of positions. Alongside Marr and Lepke, you've got Jackson Young, who was solid this year for Lublin. Eric Sisna, who had a fantastic year for Canuck Roselaire and was huge in the Champions League for them. Brody Hofer, who was one of the offensive leaders for this team. As Skylar Varga, who's coming off a really good career for Long Beach, and Sean at moments last year for Team Canada. On the right side, it's going to be absolutely loaded. Not only do you have Shawan Vernon-Evans and Arthur Schwartz, who have played at the highest levels, but then also Xander Ketrzinski, who has shown time and time again that he can be a go-to player and was also one of the best scorers in France this year. Down the middle, you got Danny Demyanenko coming off a huge season for Resovia in the Plusliga, Jackson Howe, who is one of the best middle blockers in the Bundesliga, Danon Kofijima, who is undoubtedly one of the best physical specimens we have in volleyball, touching well over 12 feet. And then in the libero position, you have Landon Curry, who's coming off a really solid season for Cisterna in the Italian league. So I'm really excited to see what this version of Team Canada can do in its second year under Dan Lewis. Now, Canada fans, don't you worry. I will have a video breaking down this Canadian roster out probably very shortly after this one. Next up, we have China. Now, China is the only team who knows they are safe from the VNL. Now, China is the only team who knows they are safe in the VNL because they are hosting the finals. And I mean, it helped them last year. They went 3-9, technically finished 17th in the intercontinental round, but actually finished 8th because they were able to qualify for the finals. But, you know, in speaking to their head coach, Vital Heinen, last year, it sounds like this is a team that had a lot of injuries last year and actually still looked pretty decent. Now, last year, this team was really interesting. I'm pretty sure Vital Heinen set a record for substitutions per match because he was bringing his guys in and out like prairie dogs. One guy that we really noticed was middle blocker Li Yongzhen, who was a very good blocker for them, especially in the first half of the VNL, including a 10-block match performance against the U.S. in Chicago. But other guys to watch on this roster are like Zhang Xuan. He is a long time opposite. When he hits the ball, it sounds different. But then you also have Wen Zhihua, who was the leading scorer in the Chinese league this year. You also have Zhu Zhihong, who was the MVP of the Chinese league this year. It was a breakout season for Zhihong at just 24 years old, and this is his first time on the national team. Because none of these guys really play in any international leagues, it's tough to know what we're going to get. But I'm really interested to see what the madman of Vital Heinen can do in his third year with this Chinese team. Next, we have Cuba. Cuba currently ranked 12th in the world. They finished 7th last year at the VNL, going 6-6 and losing to Italy in the quarters. But then they finished 20th at the World Championships, where they lost to Portugal and the U.S. and didn't make it out of pool. Now, Cuba is interesting because you still have a lot of their best players. You know, Marlon Yant, who led the VNL last year. You've got Miguel Lopez, who's one of the best offensive players and had a really big year, helping Osaka Blutian win the championship in the SV League. And of course, you've got the GOAT of all GOATs, Robert Landy Simon, coming back down the middle. But I am a little worried for Cuba, and I do think this might be at the beginning of the downfall of this team because there is a number of players that they will be missing. Jesus Herrera, their opposite, who was the top scorer in Turkiye this year. You're missing Jose Gutierrez, who I thought had a really strong year for Piacenza this year. His brother, Miguel Gutierrez, who was the 13th best scorer in Turkiye. And you're also missing Osniel Magarejo, and Magarejo has been a staple on this team for a long time. It's always been Lopez, Yant, and Magarejo on the outside. But last year, he really didn't play that much, and it seems like he didn't really like that and opted out of the team this year. So while they still have a bunch of their best players, as I said, Yant led the VNL in scoring last year. Masso was the 11th best scorer in the VNL. Lopez, I mean, he's one of the best offensive players in the game. He's one of the hardest hitters in the game as well. You are missing a little bit of that depth, and that's something that's really going to be needed for Cuba over the course of a really long VNL summer, and then potentially to go up against Canada at the NORCECA Championships to win that Olympic spot. Down the middle, they'll be strong as always. You've got Robert Landy Simon, and you've got Javier Concepcion, who is an absolute homie. But the big question for Cuba, as always, is who's going to set the ball? And if they do it, can they not do it in such a terrible fashion? Julio Gomez, Livan Taboada, and Christian Thorndike have seen their times as the starting setter for Cuba. And every single time it seems like, you know, this is going to be the next guy to really help them elevate them to the next level. And they never really do. And I mean this with all sincerity. I know, there's always that competition between Canada and Cuba in the NORCECA side, but I am very worried that if this team doesn't qualify through NORCECA for the Olympics this year, it may be the end of any Olympic aspirations for these guys. Next, we have France, and the two-time defending Olympic champs are going with a bit of a different look this year. Now, I did a more extensive breakdown of this French roster when it was announced earlier back in May, so make sure you go check that out. But I will give you the Coles notes. This is going to be a very different team as there is going to be a number of guys who are going to be taking the summer off. Irvin Engepeth won't be there. Kevin Tilley won't be there. Jean Patry won't be there. Bartolomei Chenenieze won't be there. Jania Grabanikov won't be there. Yasin Nuetsi, even though he's technically on this roster and he's pictured on this graphic, I doubt he'll be there. Hell, when they did their pre-tournament friendlies, he showed up just to play the trumpet before the match and wasn't in any type of match attire. And he also originally announced that he wasn't going to be playing, so I'm very doubtful we'll see him at all. And then, of course, Benjamin Toniuti has also retired from the French national team. But France is probably one of the few teams in the world that can see that many guys take the summer off and still look absolutely elite. And I think it's perfect timing to give some maturation for this really good young roster they have. And I mean, they're still going to have guys like Antoine Brizard and Trevor Clevenot to lead the way. Théophile, who was one of the best scorers in the VNL last year and had a really big season for Trentino as well, should lead them on the right side. Stéphane Boyer is back for the first time in a few years as well, which might be one of his last kicks of the can at a VNL spot. And then you've got the young talent of guys like the Heno brothers, Hiller and Matisse, who both had a really good season. Hiller was with Lublin, got to play the Champions League. Matisse Heno was fantastic, playing for his dad in Gorjuv in the Plus Liga, and then ended up tearing up the LNV playoffs as a medical joker. Later on this year, you got Antoine Protron, who was great for Scra. You have Thomas Puyol, who was also great in the French league. Like, there's just so many guys who could line up alongside Trevor Clevenot on the left side. And then down the middle, too, you've got guys like Moussa Gailly, Daniel Bekedo, who was really good at coming in off the bench for Piacenza, even though at his young age. Yoris Sedik is back on this roster once again, although he wasn't on that initial roster, so we're going to see how it works. Same thing with Nicolas Legoff. He wasn't on that initial roster that was posted by the Team Yavbu account, which is basically their team's account, and neither was Sedik. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting moves to make down the middle there. But regardless, this French team is still elite. And given their young enthusiasm and still having go-to guys like Brizard, Clevenot, and Théophile, I really expect this team to be competing at the end of the VNL in China. Next up, we have Germany. Now, Germany is really interesting because this is a team who really blew everyone away back in 2023 and 2024 by, qualifying for the Olympics and being very, very good. But since then, it has been a bit of a struggle. 2025 was kind of abysmal for them. They finished 14th in the VNL, going 5-7, and then went out and couldn't get past pool play, albeit in a really tough pool alongside teams like Slovenia and Bulgaria. And I'm really interested to see if this team can really improve this year. They do have a new coach this year in Massimo Botti, as Winiarski stepped down last fall. And I mean, this is honestly a great pickup. As we know, every coach in the world is just 1 or 2 years away from being replaced from an Italian guy. This is no different. Now, this is mostly the same team we saw last year. Grosser is on this roster, but I really doubt we're going to see him really over the course of the VNL. Philipp John was one of the best scorers last year, and I'd expect him to be kind of the same. You are missing Linus Weber on this roster, but it has been a constant back and forth of drama between him and the national team. He's actually no longer featured on the DVV website at all. And I mean, if this was a guy who went out and blew everyone away in the Plus Liga this year, I think he would have a bigger argument, but he didn't end up getting benched while playing for Warszawa, even though he started the year really, really well. So I don't think Germany is going to be missing him that much. Honestly, I think a guy they're going to be missing quite a bit is Johannes Thiele, who, in my opinion, was one of the more underrated setters in the Plus Liga this year. And one of the reasons Olsen had such a good year was the way he dished the butter. However, it does sound like he's going to be coming back for the European Championship, so that is going to be really good news for Germany. Now, Germany has a lot of depth, but you've got a lot of guys who are pretty good, but not great. Maurice Reichardt, Ruben Schott, Tobias Brand actually did have a pretty good year in Plus Liga. I thought Eric Rohrs really took a step forward and matured a little bit for Monza this year in the Lega volley as well. But none of these guys really step out as kind of a go-to guy, and they're missing the one galvanizing player who can lead this roster through tough matches. Now they're going to be really solid down the middle, as per usual. You've got Simon Torvi, who had a really good year in Trentino, Florian Krage, who was the MVP of the Bundesliga playing for Berlin. Tobias Kricktalk is back on this roster, and of course, Anton Bremer. Now, Bremer is dealing with a bit of an injury he suffered this year playing for Jastrzębski Węgiel, but it sounds like he is possibly going to be back for week 3, although that is not confirmed. Without Thiele in the setting position, they still have Jan Zimmerman, who was also pretty good for Monza this year, helped them get into the playoffs after almost being relegated the year before. And it sounds like Eric Berggraf is going to be the backup. But personally, I want to see Anselm Rhyme of Trinity Western get in there and get some reps. We saw him a little bit in the friendlies. Maybe he'll only be there as a serving sub role, but still, personally, I want to see him there. But yeah, this German team just doesn't really move the needle for me, and I would be surprised if we saw them be really, really competitive this year at the VNL. Next up on the list, we have Iran. And now Iran, currently ranked 16th in the world, technically should have made the playoffs this year. They finished 8th, going 6th and 6th, but were knocked out because of China. And then finished 8th at the World Championships as well, losing the quarters to Czechia. And now with everything going on in their country right now, I'm really interested to see how this Iranian team responds. And I think it's either going to go one of two ways. Either it's going to be a really tough go for this team with everything going on back home. That would be very understandable. Or all of that turmoil is going to galvanize this team to play even better. And I mean, Iranian people are very proud. And when their pride is at stake, they're going to go that extra mile. And the Iranian national team is actually a really big deal in Iran. Volleyball is a really big sport for them. So this is a team that is really very much in the spotlight and could feel that support from what is happening at home. Now, for this roster, I think there's actually quite a bit of depth here. On the outside, you've got a guy like Sharifi Morteza, and Morteza was one of the best players in the Turkish league this year for Istanbul Gençlik, but then you also have guys like Poria, who was pretty good coming in off the bench for Lube, although there was a bit of a disaster as he left the team partway through the season. You got Amir Hossein Esfandiar as well, Ali Haksparast, who has come in as well. I really think this is just a solid outside lineup. But the big question to me is going to be the opposite position, because for the past few seasons, it has been Amin Esmail Nezad who has really come in and led this team offensively. But there's just so much depth this year. You know, Bardia Sadat, who was the second best scorer in Turkiye with 548 points, averaged 5.32 points per set. You also have Ali Hajipur, who came in and was explosive for them at the VNL last year. And then also the young Amir Gozadeh. And now Gozadeh averaged over 4 points per set this year, playing in Italy for Grottazzolina. On top of all that, they have the enigmatic Roberto Piazza at the helm of this team. So you know things at the very least are going to be very, very entertaining. Iran knows how to put on a show, and I think they have a little bit more to play for this year. And next up, we have the two-time defending world champs in Italy. And now the Italians, I mean, they need no introduction. They're one of the best teams in the world, currently ranked second in the world. However, I do think this roster is a little deceiving because it's featuring a lot of players who I don't think we're necessarily going to see. Like Micheletto is on this roster, and I mean, he's still healing from a stress fracture in his lower back. It's very, very unlikely we'll see him at all this summer, like even in the European Championships, but we'll have to see. I highly doubt at all we'll be seeing him at the VNL. Daniele Lavia is a guy who is still probably rehabbing from a hand injury that was suffered right before the World Championships last year. We did see him towards the end of the season, kind of in and out for Trentino, but right now it's looking like he's slated to come back in week 2 for this team. Same thing with Gianelli. Gianelli is a guy who will not be on the week 1 roster and is slated to come back maybe week 2 or even week 3 for this team. But honestly, I love Gianelli is one of those guys who is always with this team, who plays every single minute. And with the amount of talent this team has, I want to see them get other guys in there. So I love the fact that Gianelli won't be there. Yuri Romano won't be on this roster early on as well. And I mean, week 1, they're going to be really taking a much different and younger roster. Mattia Bottolo is going to be the captain. It looks like he's going to be starting alongside Luca Poro, which I love. I love that pairing. Obviously, it's very different than Micheletto and Lavia, but I thought Bottolo has really earned his flowers over the past couple of years in the Lega Volley, and Luca Poro as well, who did some really special things for Modena this year. The outside group is also going to be rounded out by Francesco Sani, who, in my opinion, was like the 7th man of the year in the Lega Volley this season. He was fantastic coming off the bench all year long for Verona, and it seemed like they continuously would start Rock Mosic, and then Francesco Sani would come in and finish strong for them. And then you also have the young Mattia Orioli, who was pretty solid for Padova as well. Down the middle, you'll probably see the Modena duo of Sanguinetti and Partomati kind of start things off. I mean, Sanguinetti had a fantastic year. He was tied for second in the blocks, averaging 0.5 blocks per set. And he also hit a 68% with a 62% efficiency. He had a combined 16 errors. 16 errors this year over the course of 82 sets. He was only blocked 5 times in 82 sets, which is mind-blowing. And now Pardo Matti is one of the younger players on this team. You probably haven't heard of him before, but at just 19 years old, he also was very good for Modena, averaged just over 0.4 blocks per set this season. I think he really has the potential to be one of the next big middles for this Italian roster. Their setters week one are going to be Paolo Porro and Mattia Bonifante. Porro should be the starter, which I absolutely love. I mean, if you've seen my setter ranking video, you'll know that I think Paolo Porro is one of the most underrated setters in the world. He knows how to sling it. He just has that awareness. He has a great feel for the game, and he's just a really good volleyball player all around. And then Bonifante has had a couple of decent seasons as well with Lube Civitanova. But the big question for me is going to be in the opposite position, especially with the news that Nomori Keita is going to be joining this team most likely in 2027 as a naturalized player. The big question is, where is he going to play? And everyone is mostly going to be looking in the opposite position. Now, Yuri Romano has been that go-to guy, and he's been huge for them, especially in big moments. So in week one, they're going to be rocking with the young Alessandro Bovalenta and then Kamil Rychlicki. Now, both of these guys are coming off career years. Rychlicki led the Plus Liga in scoring for Zaksa, whereas Bovalenta helped a Piacenza team get all the way to the semifinals and then win the CEV Cup as well. I honestly think they're ultimately going to go with Bovalenta. I think he just has a little bit more upside than Rychlicki, but still, it's going to be an interesting battle to see. Now, Italy has actually never won the VNL, which is crazy. They've won the European Championships. They've won back-to-back World Championships as well. Now, without Micheletto, I'm not entirely sure if that is going to be possible. They finished second last year with him, and this is going to be a very tough tournament this year. But still, this is still an elite roster, and I could see them making the semifinals pretty easily. Next up, we have Japan. And now Japan is another team that I've already done a breakdown for when the roster was released earlier in May, so you can definitely go check that out. But I think there's going to be a lot of question marks for Laurent Tilly in his second year. There's a few big returning players to this roster. You've got Yuji Nishida coming back. You've got Kentaro Takahashi and Akihiro Yamauchi coming back down the middle. But most importantly, you have Masahiro Sakita coming back to dish the butter and lead the offense for this Japanese team. And for me, that is the biggest advantage this team can have. He is the straw that stirs the drink for this Japanese team. Now, they did go 8-4 at the VNL last year, lost in the quarters to Poland, but then everyone knows how this team disastrously fell out of the World Championships, losing to Turkiye and Canada and not even making it out of the pool. And while Tilly will have the entirety of his roster at his disposal this year, which he didn't have last year, it does seem like there was some criticisms of Tilly after the way the season went. Despite both being French, Tilly and their former coach Philippe Lane really approached things in a different manner, and it really clashed with what was the former ethos of this team. And, there's been some articles and some interviews out there suggesting that some of the top players were really questioning the way Tilly ran this team and some of the tactics they were employing, especially at the World Championships. So hopefully Tilly is able to find some common ground with this team and move forward. But I mean, it may be a little difficult given some of the drama surrounding this team and the scandals as one of their players has been arrested recently for drug possession. But, with the entire roster back, you've got Ran Takahashi, you've got Yuki Ishikawa, you've got Kento Miura, Yuji Nishida, Masahiro Sakita, Ogawa is back as well, Yamamoto. Their entire team is back, and I expect Japan to be elite, especially during the intercontinental round, and to be able to compete once again for a medal once it comes to the finals in China. Next, we have the superpowers of Poland. Now, the defending VNL champs this year are probably going to be looking to do much of the same, returning many of their starters from 2025. But this team is going to be very much a mix of some of their older, more elite players and some young guys they're trying to bring into the fold. Now, like France and Japan, I did make a video about the Polish roster earlier this year, so if you want a more in-depth analysis, definitely go check it out. Now, of course, talking about Poland, they have one of the best outside cores in the world. Leon, Semeniuk, Fornal, Szalpuk, Śliwka, the list goes on and on. And you also have Nikolai Savitsky, who is back on this roster after missing the entire 2025 VNL and the 2025 and 2026 pro season after being wrongly accused for using performance-enhancing drugs. But you've also got some other guys like Mikhail Gerzo, who was pretty good for JSW this year, Jakub Kiros, who really impressed for Norwich Czestochowa this year, Bartosz Zik as well. Down the middle, you don't have Norbert Huber on this roster, who seems to be in a bit of a tiff with head coach Nikola Gerbic, but I mean, you still have Jakub Kopkanovski and Matus Biniek. Bartolomiej Lemansky is on this roster for the first time, and at 7 feet, he had a monster year for Skra, and even though he's a little bit older, we love seeing the fact that he is now featured on this roster again. But I really think the opposite is going to be the most interesting for Poland. You've got guys like Barbovanj, who was the backup for Kurek back in 2024 at the Olympics, and then Kevin Sasak, who was one of the best opposite hitters last year in the VNL, and then backed up Kurek at the World Championships. But then you've also got Bartosz Gumulka, who had a really good year winning that starting spot over Linus Weber for Warszawa this year, and Alexei Nasevich, who, while he did play a little bit last year at the VNL, had another really big year for Gdansk in the Plus Liga. So I think all four of those guys are going to be able to compete for the starting spot. Now, as Marcin Janus has taken his retirement from international volleyball due to some health issues, Marcin Komenda will still be the guy they go with, and as will Jan Furle, because the other two guys are very young, so I really only think we're going to see Komenda and Furle for this Polish roster this year. Now, honestly, whatever roster they end up using, Poland is Poland. You know they're going to be there to compete at the end of the day. This team is elite. They have the depth, and this is a team who is really prepping for the European Championships to defend their title and grab that spot to the Olympics in 2028. Next, we have world number 13, Serbia. And now, the Serbian team is always a team I have very little confidence in, but they always somehow manage to make it through. They always somehow manage to figure it out at the end of the day, whether it was qualifying for the Olympics in 2024 or being able to pop off and dominate and beat Brazil and knock them out at the 2025 World Championships. But I do think this Serbian team will struggle once again this year, and there's a few reasons for that. Well, first, let's look at the good things. They're going to have Jelko Masulovic on the right side. It looks like he's going to be starting ahead of Drazen Lubaric. Now, Masulovic was a very good player in the Italian league this year. He led Padova in scoring with over 300 points. He led them in kills, blocks, and aces. So it finally looks like he is going to be their number one option on the right side. And I mean, they've got Alexander Nedeljkovic down the middle as well. And I think he's one of the best middle blockers in the world. In the center position, they have another options with Alexa Batak joining this roster this year alongside Vuk Todorovic and Nikola Jovovic. But I am really worried about what they can do on the outside. I mean, you've got Kujundžić and Peric, who are usually their go-to guys. Kujundžić is injured, and we may not see him at all. Peric is starting to come back, but he's also not healthy either. So it looks like it's going to be the young Vuk Kulpinac. Now, Kulpinac started this year for Paris, and he was all right, averaged like just over 2 points per set. He will be headed to play for Pepperdine next year in the NCAA. And then you also have Lazar Marinovic, who played in the Serbian league this year as well. So maybe I'm just pessimistic and I don't think they're going to be able to really compete with those other teams. But considering they're missing some of their go-to guys on the outside, I'm really wondering who is going to lead this team and if they're going to be able to compete with even the middle of the pack of the VNL this year. But I've been wrong pretty much every year on how well Serbia is going to do. So honestly, I'll probably be wrong again this year. Now we're coming towards the end of this list, and now we have Slovenia. Now, Slovenia is a team that I think every year kind of surprises everyone, right? Last year, they finished first in the Intercontinental round, going 11-1, and then ultimately finished fourth, losing to Italy in the bronze medal match. Now, they did come back to earth a little bit at the World Championships, where they finished 11th, losing to USA in the round of 16. But the Slovenian team is really interesting because for so long, they've had this golden generation that's really led the way. And this year, I'm really hoping to see that some of the young guys take up that mantle and start leading this team a little bit more. You know, guys like Tine Ernout, Tonček Stern, Ziga Stern, Gregor Ropret, Chemin Klebul have really been the centerpieces of this Slovenian roster for a while. But this year, Ropret is not on the roster, neither is Clement Chebul, so we're going to have to see some other guys step up and play some minutes. Of course, you still have Rok Mozic, and I mean, he's been one of the best offensive players in Italy for a number of years, although this year he was plagued by injuries, and he had some moments of brilliance for Verona, but was often subbed out in place of Francesco Sani. And while you still have Ernout, who is quite a bit older now, and Ziga Stern, I'm also looking at guys like Luka Marovt and Rok Brachko to step up and take some minutes for them on the left side. In the setter position to replace Ropret, I'm looking at a guy like Ropes Planistic, who also played for Verona in a backup role behind Micah Christensen this year. Down the middle, they're still stacked with guys like Jan Kozemeric, Sasso Stalakar, and Alan Payenk. But on the opposite, even though Tonchik Stern is still only 30 years old and is still a very, very good player, I really want to see Nick Mujanovic step into that role. Now, we did see him play a little bit on the left side last year at the World Championships, and it's just due to some injuries and some issues going on with the team. And ultimately, his lack of ability to pass is really what hurt this team. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them try to do that again with Stern on the right side, or maybe Mujanovic on the right side and Stern on the left, just have the ability to have two of their best offensive players on the court at one time. But Mujanovic, to me, is one of those very exciting young offensive players who's up there with like a Ferry Riegers, who can be a go-to guy, get a lot of volume, and score a lot of points. So honestly, like, I could see the Slovenian team doing very, very well again, but I'm almost kind of expecting them to take a bit of a step back as they're trying to transition to a new generation, especially without Ropret there. I think they may struggle a little bit more. Now we come to Turkiye. Now, Turkiye, currently ranked 14th in the world, is very interesting because last year at the VNL wasn't great. Finished 16th, went 3-9. Honestly, a little lackluster. But in between the VNL and the World Championships, we saw them get rid of Umit Kakir and bring in Slobodan Kovac. And then things changed. They looked really good, really dismantling Japan and Canada, two VNL teams, taking care of business with Netherlands. And then, unfortunately, suffered an injury to their best player in Efe Mandaracha before playing Poland and losing to them in the quarterfinals. Now, this is a Turkish team that I think is actually pretty stacked with talent. You've got Adis Lagumja and his brother Mirza Lagumja. Now, Adis was one of the best scorers in Italy for many years, and Mirza has shown his capability many times with the various teams in the Turkish league. You know, if you saw any of my stuff preparing for the Champions League, you'll know how underrated I think Murat Yeni-Pazar is. I think Berkay Baraktar in the libero position is super solid as well. And Bediran Bulbul and Maturo Macic are really strong down the middle as well. Same thing with Ahmet Tumer. But the big question for this Turkish team is, will Mandaracha be healthy for this VNL? And I mean, it seems like it's a little bit up in the air at the moment. What are they going to do on the outside if Efe Mandaracha isn't good to go? And now we know he's probably not going to be there for week 1. They're trying to maybe get him back for week 2, but that's a little bit up in the air. So without Mandaracha, I mean, they're going to be looking at guys like Efe Bayram, Mirza Lagumja. Gökhan Yüksel also had a pretty good year for Galatasaray, coming in off the bench when Thomas Jeschke was injured. You also have Kafir Kirkit as well. So I think this Turkish team has the potential to, be a middle of the pack team. And if they were healthy, maybe even push for a playoff spot. But without Mandaracha, there's still so many questions to be answered around this Turkish team. Speaking to some Turkish people, some of them think they can do really, really well, and others are just hoping that they can survive. So I think it's really up in the air. Now, our penultimate team is Ukraine, and Ukraine was a team that really surprised some people last year. They were newcomers to the VNL and then went out and finished 10th with a 6-6 record. Ukraine was really close to making the playoffs in their first year of the VNL, relying on guys like Vasil Chupchi on the opposite and Ilya Kovalev and Dmytro Yanchuk on the outside. And then, of course, Yuri Semeniuk down the middle. But in 2026, they're going to be even better as this team is also bringing back Ole Plotnitsky. Now, this is undeniably massive for this Ukrainian program. Plotnitsky, in my opinion, is one of the best outsides in the world. He's fast, he serves strong, he's got a bullet of a left arm, and he's really going to add some star power to an already really, really solid Ukrainian roster. And that's just going to allow them to have a little bit more depth as well. So with the addition of Plotnitsky to guys like Yanchuk and Kovalev on the outside, they have 3 different options who they can rely on pretty well to go out there and get them some points. And honestly, with this addition, I would not be surprised to see Ukraine potentially competing in China at the end of the tournament. And finally, wrapping things up as we always do with the United States. And, the U.S. has that advantage of already knowing that they've qualified for the 2028 Olympics as the host. And last year, we saw them bring a much younger team to the tournament. Now, once again, this is a team that I've already done a breakdown on. So if you want to know a little bit more and a little bit more in depth about the roster, go check out that video. But it sounds like the mandate from Karch Karai was that if you are able to play this summer and if you want to play at the Olympics, you need to be in the gym. And so that's why we're seeing the majority of their best players are back. Micah Christensen is back. TJ DeFalco is back. Matt Anderson is back. Taylor Averill is back. Eric Shoji, although he never really left, is back as well. Now, there's a few big things to note. First and foremost, no Aaron Russell. I mean, he had a really long season playing for Zavierci. I would not be surprised if he was maybe a little bit banged up. But then you also have Matt Anderson on the left side. And that is going to create a bit of an interesting scenario. This is nothing new. While he's usually played on the opposite for Team USA, he's typically played on the left side for most of his pro teams. And the idea of having a TJ DeFalco, Matt Anderson starting on the left side for any team is very tantalizing. But it's also going to create a bit of a power vacuum on the right side. And I think it's really up for grabs. There's going to be three main guys vying for the spot. Kyle Ensing, Gabby Garcia, and Jake Haynes is also returning to this roster. Ensing has been super solid for this team for a number of years, generally playing that backup role behind Anderson. Gabby Garcia has really only been on the roster since last year. And while he did have a pretty good world championships, neither of these guys start professionally, right? And both of them are pretty similar situations. Ensing plays for Zavierci, where he's the backup, and Garcia plays for Trentino, where he is also the backup. Whereas Jake Haynes on the other side is a guy who, has had many MVP-like seasons for Berlin and is a proven 20-point a game scorer. This is a guy who can go out and get a lot of volume, get set quite a bit, and, can put up 20, 30 points a game pretty easily. So I think that battle on the right side is going to be very interesting. There's also going to be some figuring out to do on the left side as well. Of course, you've got Matt Anderson and TJ DeFalco. I think Cooper Robinson, coming off a Rookie of the Year season in Japan, will also get a decent amount of playing time. But then you're going to have to figure out who's going to slot in as that fourth option. And, you've got a couple of guys. I'm specifically looking at Ethan Champlin and Jordan Ewart, who can really step up and play that role, whether it's a bit of a smaller, more versatile, just ball control type of guy. Jordan Ewart had a really strong season in Turkiye. He was the ninth best scorer in the league. He averaged 4.25 points per set. But I do think the edge does go to Champlin. He's a little bit younger. I think he's just a little bit more versatile. He played more than Ewart last year, but still, we're really going to have to see what the GOAT of all GOATs, Karch Kiraly, is going to want to do with this roster. And with everyone coming back, you'd expect the U.S. to be maybe a little bit more competitive last year and to be back into the playoff race to make China at the end of the VNL. And that wraps it up for my 2026 men's VNL preview. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know down in the comments. And after you do that, make sure you subscribe to Volleyball Source. Turn on that bell so you get all of the notifications. Come join us on the Volleyball Source Discord, the best online volleyball community in the world. And then make sure you follow me over on Twitch at That Volleyball Guy, where I'll be doing all of my live watch alongs. All right. Hope you guys enjoy the VNL.